Well, where did we get to last week? Yes, it was the nasty, murderous crooks, pieces of shit. They're dead, they can't get me. That's really good. We named three of the worst five: Chow Hayes, Christopher Dale Flannery, and Nick the Bulgarian Radev, in that order from bottom down. And now we're going to the rest.
Yes, but before we do, Joel, I'm going to quickly talk about a few who didn't make the list before we move on to that top two.
The loser list. Should have murdered more.
The ones, like my under 14 footy trophy, most improved crooks, the
best and murderous.
Yeah. And look, there's one very young fellow, and he was young, Paul Calapolites, PK or Paulie, to his mates, was a gangster and drug dealer based in Sunshine in Melbourne's West. Martial arts trained, dripping with human growth hormone and steroids to the point of murderous craziness. His party trick was to launch a flying kick at a stop sign, that you'd see at any intersection, and he would basically just bend it in two. So a terrifying human being with a lot of really bad intent. God forbid that you ever set up a heroin supply business in Sunshine. Yeah. He hated heroin dealers with a passion, not out of a sense of civic duty mind, just because he hated them. And basically he would pull you up and either give you a horrific beating or worse.
It sounds like an excuse, if anything. Just the fact that heroin dealers are seen as scum. I really like beating people up. I can beat a heroin dealer.
I'm a drug dealer too, but I don't like that kind of drug dealer.
Yes, I'm a party drug dealer. I'm the fun guy. You're the sad guy in the corner.
So he is probably, in street fighting terms, he is probably the most terrifying opponent you could possibly speak of. He's martial arts trained from the time he was about 3, but if that street fight did get out of hand, he had his toys, a couple of 9mm handguns that he kept just in case someone got lucky.
Yes, if something escalates,
he'd often make $50,000 a day. Drug dealing from his high security home in West.
Why the fuck aren't we doing this?
Yeah, he's making a lot of money.
This is ridiculous. I work like a chump.
Look, he as a man in his early 20s, brought together a group of well-known lunatics that became known as the Sunshine Boys. It featured Benji Venyman, who was a hitman. And associate of Carl Williams, but this stage Benji's only 15, and there's another lunatic by the name of Dino Debra, and Dino is said to have an IQ of around 80, which makes
so he can spell his name.
Yeah, well, he's got it's sometimes spelt with a double A, Debra, or sometimes with only one. So I think
he can't.
I think it was just they kept that second A off for Dino's benefit, because he wasn't terribly bright. My cat is probably smarter than Dino, and your dog, Joel, would give him a run for his money as well.
Oh, yeah. But, she sits when I say, so that's good. Occasionally.
I don't know if Dino would actually do that. Now, they're all dead. These guys are all dead. PK, Benji, of course, famously shot dead by Mick Gatto in what the courts determined was a self-defense. And
a horrific skating accident.
And Dino Debra was shot dead, he went down like a gangster, the way he would love to have gone. A hail of bullets outside a home that he kept for growing marijuana in.
What a sad dream to have.
Yeah, that was his dream. All of these guys, Debra particularly, had obsessions with movies like Scarface and The Godfather, and they kept paraphernalia nailed to their walls and all that sort of stuff, and they could quote the movie. Dino probably not well, but really that was their ambition, to go down a hail of bullets,
so pathetic.
But PK brought these guys together. They were Dino and Benji went to Sunshine West Tech. Can you imagine what these guys were like at 15? They're actually torturing They're torturing opponents, rivals, people they don't like in their parents' garages on the weekends, and then popping off to school with $100,000 worth of gold around their necks, in the very best lifestyle.
Yes, sportswear. Your
wear.
Sunday best Adidas tracksuit.
Yeah, their very best active wear money can buy, and that was them. They sort of left school. Dino would have gone. He was academic. The academic world was not for Dino.
No, it's not for everyone. I understand that, but sounds like he was an exception to any rule.
Yeah, so PK Paul Kalapalidis was essentially the mentor of these guys, and was one of the most feared men in Melbourne. But his problem was that he taught one of his underlings too well, and it was Benji and PK. They had a falling out, but not enough for PK to allow the little Maltese killer into his high security home in West Sunshine. There's a mistake right there, PK. And the rest is history, with PK getting a full air conditioning from multiple rounds in the head and chest. And we know Benji did it, and that Paul at that stage, like a lot of these gangsters in their 20s, by the late 20s, he just wanted out. He just wanted out, but he couldn't get out. And so...
That seems smart.
Yeah, he had the falling out with Benji. Benji, this little guy, this terrifying little bastard all on his own, but PK would have thought he had his measure. He was terrifying, actually, and unspeakably violent. The stories of the beatings that he gave people are just remarkable. He spent a very short period in Loddon prison in Victoria, and was beaten by two other inmates who sort of basically got the jump on him. And then he squared up with both of them, and both of them ended up with severe spinal injuries. So ended up basically being paralysed as a result of coming into Paul Kalapalidis'
It's not very nice.
Orbit. And so he was just a terrifying human being, mostly, just dripping with steroids and human growth hormone, just dangerous. Anything could have set him off at any time. So that's Paul Kalapalidis. I always just, read the stories about his beatings and just go, wow, that guy just really had a lust for violence. The other one I want to mention is a person who is a little bit more rational, a little bit more sensible, and an old school gangster, a former painter and docker by the name of Frederick James Mr. Cool Baisley. And Baisley was a hitman convicted of conspiracy to murder Griffith-based businessman Don McKay. Convicted of conspiracy to murder, not actual murder. And he refused throughout his entire life to say what happened to Don McKay, but he basically was the one who murdered McKay and disposed of McKay's body. Don McKay being the Griffith businessman who was becoming a problem for the Green Castle Ndrangheta boys, Calabrian Mafia boys that were running big marijuana plantations. In that part of the world, and so they chipped in and basically had McKay disappear. And the person who did that was Fred Baisley.
Sounds like money well spent.
Well, not really, because it brought an extraordinary amount of sunlight into that area, and led to the pursuit of people like Aussie Bob Trimboli, who ended up having to flee overseas. Were never captured, but basically had to go to places where Australia had no right to extradite him. So he lived in Ireland for a long time, and then died in Spain.
See, that's not so bad.
It really just did put a spotlight. It was really, not just a murderous and horrible thing to do, which it was. Yes. And the other side of that story is that a certain Labor politician started spreading around the nonsense that the mafia that the mafia was starting to perpetuate about McKay, that he'd had an affair with a woman, which was complete lie. That man was Al Grasby, by the way, a minister for multiculturalism in the Whitlam government.
There you
And
go.
he was very lucky to avoid prosecution for criminal defamation.
Yeah.
But he was spreading this gossip around as a sort of distraction. But one thing I can tell you for sure is that Frederick James Baisley murdered Don McKay, and how he disposed of that body is anybody's guess. There are various stories about the body being um, basically disintegrated, put through a chipper,
Yeah.
and then put through some of the plantations that these boys own. There's another one that he was buried. There've been a number of attempts to find his remains. That he was, and the most recent one was New South Wales Police excavated a big site just outside Griffith and found nothing.
Yeah.
He
There you
may
go.
well have ended up in the Murray River or the Murrumbidgee, who knows? But certainly Baisley did it, and Baisley, like an old school crook, remained tight-lipped, would not say
Yep.
a thing. He started off as a gunman in Billy the Texan Longley's former, in Billy the Texan Longley's painter and docker group, and this was during the painter and docker wars, where guns were always drawn during an election, and shots fired all the time. So his last known episode of gun violence for the painters and dockers saw a ballot box being stolen. So basically the ballot box could be manipulated so the right people could be appointed as office bearers to the union, and Baisley and Longley were involved in a shootout with this other group, and it seems that Baisley at this stage decided that being a gunman in the painters and dockers was the sort of career that could end very abruptly. So he walked away from that, and basically he became a hitman. His other major job, this is a really odd story. It's the murder of drug couriers Doug and Isabel Wilson, who decided that they were going to leave the Mr. Asia drug syndicate run by Terence Clark, sometimes known as Terence Sinclair, the New Zealand head of the Mr. Asia drug syndicate, an extremely violent man himself, and they wanted to go out, wanted to leave basically his control without permission, and so that led to Terence Clark offering Baisley a sum of money to murder Doug and Isabel Wilson. In 1986, Baisley was sentenced to life in prison over the double murder of the couple. Their bodies were found buried in Rye on Melbourne's Mornington Peninsula in May 1979. But here's the odd part of that story, because he was actually told that they had a dog, Taj, and the dog had to be killed as well. But Fred Baisley was not. Well, he was a dog lover, and he's a former poodle breeder.
Poodles. Okay.
So when it came to murdering Doug and Isabel Wilson, no worries, two in the brain, but he couldn't kill a dog.
It's like in movies when the dog dies and everyone cries, and the people are there lying, staring blankly with their brains out. They're like, "Oh no, you're fine." But the dog is very sad.
So he murders the Wilsons, buries them in a grave in Rye, but decides he'd just take the dog with him and and drives back to Melbourne with little Papa bouncing around in the back, and just lets him out in Brunswick. Basically, how'd you get there? And off went the little dog. And of course, the dog basically led to the trail. Led to the trail of the missing Doug and Isabel Wilson, and ultimately led to his conviction. So Baisley was convicted because he just couldn't kill a dog, and you'd have to say, good on him. Probably shouldn't have murdered those two people either for money, but good on him. Yeah. Good on you for not murdering that, for not killing that dog. But
he'd be the hero of the film.
Well, yeah, but and that's why he doesn't get into our top five, of course, Joel, because
Bleeding heart.
really, if you were Chris Flannery or Chow Hayes would have killed a dog just for practice, just to keep his arm in. So that's why Baisley doesn't make our top five, and so we come to our number two, and I know people are wondering who that would be. Well.
There's been some good guesses.
There have been some very good guesses, and I've seen them. And I think we've got a few that are very right, and that is Stan the Man, or Stonner, sometimes called Stonner Smith. And what makes a good crook? I mean, how do we judge what a successful crook is? If we were going to put our list together on who was the most successful crook, Stan would win it hands down. And we judge this by saying how rarely you spend time in jail. And Stan spent, I think, 3 months in his adult life, 3 months in jail. And that was over a marijuana and amphetamine possession rap in Victoria that he decided to serve at his own leisure. And that was it, so when we look at some of these other crooks, they're in and out of jail. Stan, 3 months total as an adult. Yeah. And the other thing that we would measure a successful crook from, because most of them you see end up in a public housing, with drug and alcohol problems. Stan Smith dies with a lump sum under investment of $25 million, right? So he has been successful
not bad
by any measure.
And by contrast, like Chow Hayes spent a shitload of time in jail.
Chow was in and out of jail all the time, 6 months here, 12 months there, all insignificant periods.
On the list for being violent, but he wasn't successful.
And then,
he was a fucking
course,
loser.
the murder of Bobby Lee. But yeah, so Stan hardly spends any time. He interestingly, he does go to a youth prison, and he's likely to have been certainly violently abused and possibly sexually abused. He was a child of the Depression. Grew up in Balmain, in what was then a strictly working class suburb.
Not anymore.
God no.
Oh, would you like a latte with your latte?
You need sort of Stan Smith money just to get in there.
Have a backyard.
And that, indeed, he did make a lot of money out of real estate, but
well, I mean, if you've invested in fucking Balmain.
He was basically brought under the wing of Len McPherson. And so Len was an emerging bigwig, and Stan sort of was under his wing. And I would use Stan because he was the most violent human being in the room, capable of extraordinary violence. McPherson was involved in a lot of brothels early on, so they tell stories about how Stan would just way into a brothel and start belting women around. There's a story that he hung a woman from the fourth floor window by her legs and so forth. And with Lenny McPherson walking in behind him, throwing money around, saying, "That's for your medical bills. That's for your medical bills." But Stan had this innate rage. As he gets older, it starts to ameliorate. It starts to diminish, and there were I saw sort of testimonies from women about, "Oh, he was a lovely man, Stan. He was a lovely man. He was a ladies' man." So clearly he had changed. He married his wife. He was married to his wife for 50 years before his death. So
married, as in married, I suppose.
Well, he doted after
around
her, and she, towards the end of his life, was suffering from severe dementia, and that leads us into Stan's death, because he did some very strange things before he died. But before we do that, we need to look at just basically what he was involved in. So Stan Smith was involved in 15 murders. He was the most successful hitman. People don't even know who he is. And he was involved in 15 murders, 25 shooting incidents, and again, 3 months in prison. So
Yeah.
that tells you basically everything. And as the years went by, that group, essentially the McPherson, later George Freeman was added to it, known as the team, would use Stan as their muscle. I mean, he was part of that triumvirate, but he was the one who get the murders done. He was the one who would be called in to dispose of the lunatics. And Chris Flannery is almost certainly one of them. It's never been determined, but it is my strong belief that Stan Smith was murdered in George Freeman's house on and around May 1985. And they would use Smith because Smith was the cool guy who basically wouldn't panic, who wouldn't freeze when they saw, when they looked into Chris Flannery's baby blues. Some of the other men might have wavered, but not Stan.
Yeah.
And we know that because he committed a murder in 1971, sorry, I think it was 1972, of Stuart John Regan, the magician, the man who used to make people disappear, an entirely unpleasant piece of work. And a child murderer as well. The stories about him are horrific. And he was a pimp, a very violent pimp, who was making a big name for himself in the Sydney scene. And so the team, basically the triumvirate of Stan Smith, Len McPherson, and George Freeman, decided that they were going to deal with him, and they did this by bringing him close. They said, "Hey, why don't you come and join us? We're impressed. We're really impressed with your work." They had a meeting.
Flattery everywhere.
They had a meeting with Regan where Len McPherson was present, and another member of the team, very senior member of that team, Fred Paddles Anderson, was also there. And and they said, "Well, as I say, we love your work. We want you to come and join us. We think you could add to this, and we want to show you the illegal gaming business, the casino business. George is just down the road, so why don't you go and meet George?" And so they went outside this pub, in Marrickville, and sure enough, there was George Freeman, 200 metres down the road, waving. And along, so she's go and meet George. She's going to show you all about the casino business. And Stuart John Regan, this absolute lunatic who used to always wear a bulletproof vest, but wasn't this day, and a gunman and a man who used to make people disappear. He was completely conned into this, and he walked up and he met George Freeman, and George Freeman shook his hand and said, "It's good to meet you, Stuart. Let's go and let me go and show you the casino business." They walked another 20, 25 metres, and standing in the shop front and hiding away in the shop front was Stan Smith, who came forward and shot Stuart John Regan dead, and then handed Freeman the gun. And so Freeman put a couple in him as well, so they could always. They did this. It's kind of a ritual, but it's more like. I put some bullets into him, you put some bullets into him. That means we're all equally guilty and no one's going to give the other one up. But again, it's instructive as to why they used Stan Smith to do away with Stuart John Regan, who was an incredibly violent, dangerous human being. And it was Stan Smith that did that. And that's what leads me to believe that Chris Flannery, who was completely out of control in 1985, was led to Freeman's house. There were a number in his downstairs bar. There are a number of little hidey hole places that Stan Smith could have concealed himself in, and he just came forward with an automatic weapon and went bang, 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 bang. See you later, Chris. And they rolled up the carpets and put they rolled up the carpets and with Flannery in them and took him out in the water and dumped his body there. That's the most plausible theory. A number of senior police say that it could have been McPherson. Who pulled the trigger on Flannery. I don't buy it, only because by this stage McPherson, the gang war's sort of out of control. Flannery's out of control. McPherson's a very, very edgy character. He's walking the carpet thin in his Gladesville home.
Yeah, that's what I
peering out
figured.
through
Yeah,
the Venetians and taking
yeah,
down numbers of cars that he thinks are a bit suspicious.
pacing around.
That's not the guy who's going to come forward
Nah,
out of the cupboard and go bang 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 to Chris Flannery. That's got to be Stan Smith. He
yep,
spent a lot of time overseas, Stan Smith, and he made mafia connections, particularly with the Chicago mob. He spent a lot of time in Vegas, where the Chicago mob were heavy on the ground, and they seem to love him. they really, he'd Stan would be a pretty basic guy. Left school at 11, right? But he'd tell stories of incredible Australian gangland violence, and the mob just seemed to lap it all up.
yeah. They
So
love
yeah.
Australians over there too. We're a gimmick, so you become a cartoon character, like a comic book feature.
Yeah, tell us
they love
another story, Stan. Tell us another story.
Yeah, tell us about how you ride kangaroos to school.
Well, no, it'd be tell us about that time
You're murderers.
you murdered you murdered Pretty Boy Walker. Tell us about that
Yeah.
time. You knocked off Stuart John Regan. So she had a million
Would
stories.
have loved this podcast.
So he spent large amounts of time in the States with La Cosa Nostra, with the Sicilian Mafia. He was, unlike Freeman and McPherson, we're going to briefly touch on this, he decided, and he was very smart, he realised that there was money to be made in drugs. Freeman and McPherson wouldn't go anywhere near it, and indeed they had arguments with Smith about it. But Smith kept it very quiet. For the most part, it was marijuana importations from Thailand and the Philippines coming into Australia, and sometimes local plantations in the Sunshine Coast hinterland. They were very clever about things. They used couriers. They used a prominent couriers signage on vehicles to move drugs all around the place. He was watched. Stan was watched by the National Crime Authority, and they, police that I've spoken to who were seconded there. So you'd see this character come in, a baseball cap, sunglasses, and then he'd sort of wander around and then he'd disappear. And we couldn't ever really quite identify him. We know he was there. The keys would be left on the wheel of the van, and then he'd be gone.
Yeah.
So he was moving a lot of marijuana around, and this leads to his one and only spell in jail as an adult. He's actually managing rock bands. This is 1930s character from Depression. He's managing rock bands because he realised, he's a very smart guy, right? He realises that the best way of moving dope around is to make contacts in, shall we say, the arts. In the arts, because they're going to move a lot of weight around for him. And so the only time he gets pinched, he's actually he's the tour manager of a Canadian band and I can't remember the name of them. They were not a big band, but they did a tour of Australia, and Stan was on the plane with them from Sydney to Melbourne, and they found, I think, an ounce of hash and a very small amount of amphetamines on Stan, and that's what he was charged with. And was ultimately given a 3 months jail term. Basically, didn't turn up to serve his time for a long time. There were warrants outstanding for his arrest. He was wandering around New South Wales and Queensland like he owned the joint, and in touch with police all the time and so forth. But no one ever bothered to say, "Hey, Stan, there's a warrant outstanding, and we're duty bound to arrest you on the spot." So he just wandered down. In the 70s to Melbourne and said, "Right, I'll come and do my time," and did his 3 months then. His son, this really does need telling. His eldest son was a heroin addict, and this was the bane of Stan's existence. And he tried desperately to get his son into rehab, and did it unsuccessfully on 3 occasions. The boy just left, and he continued to use drugs, and then one day overdosed and died. So Stan's eldest son has died of a heroin addiction. Now, this is every kind of every dad fantasy, right? Stan's able to pull it off. He finds out who sold the heroin to his son. He was a drug dealer on Sydney North Shore, and he agrees to meet this guy off the Wakefield.
Wakehurst Parkway?
Yeah, Wakehurst Parkway. Sorry, thank you.
Yeah.
Off the Wakehurst Parkway, and basically kills him. He murders him. Most of the time, Stan gangland killings, it'd be shots fired, but this time it was basically he ran over him 3 or 4 times and left him to die. And that was just straight out retribution for killing his son. Towards the end of his life, this is the other thing, there should be movies made about Stan Smith because he was just an extraordinary character. He was, I only saw him once, and that was in a boozer in Double Bay, the Royal Oak Hotel. And he walked in there with his baseball cap and sunglasses, and everyone sort of, there were always sort of duckers and dodgers in the joint, moving a bit of stolen gear and bookies and SPs and stuff, and everyone sits up straight. It was like the principal had walked into the classroom. Everyone sits up straight. Oh, it's Stan Smith, and all I noticed was this kind of shadowy character. With a baseball cap and sunglasses on, walk in and then walk out of the place, and that was that. But he was in the criminal milieu. He was the top of the tree. Everyone was scared of him. Everyone, even Rogerson, was scared of him, and Rogerson was scared of no one because he was a cop. But Stan was just capable of making or terminating your life, no matter who you were.
Yeah.
He died in 2010. He died completely untouched by law enforcement. But before he died, he had the most extraordinary experience, and it was conversion to Christianity, Pentecostal Christianity. And,
the good one.
And so it seemed it was entirely sincere. It wasn't like a prison cell conversion where I found God, so can you take 5 years off my sentence?
Yeah.
It was a genuine conversion. He would go and he would spend one night a week feeding the homeless. He would spend another day letterboxing people and knocking on doors and wanting to talk to them about God, which is a terrifying experience when you think about it. If you're sitting at home, Stan Smith knocks on your door and wants to talk to you about God. There are wonderful stories of young crooks all basically seeking his approbation for a criminal enterprise or other, for their particular criminal enterprise, and knocking on Stan's door. He lived not far away from where you grew up, by the way, Joel.
Down the beaches.
Yeah, he lived in Wales for a while, but he still called Balmain home. But anyway, people, young crooks with a scam or an enterprise in mind would knock on their door and seek his approval. Because if he provides his approval, it really adds to it. And so these young crooks would come in and stand and say, okay, well, let's get on our knees and pray to God for the success of this venture. So you'd have these sort of heavily tattooed fuck knuckles, and they'd be on their knees at Stan's place, basically praying to Jesus.
That they can pull this off.
That they're able to pull this off, and so ridiculous. It was a sincere thing. As I say, he had. And this is according to senior police estimates. His assets were worth about $25 million, and he knows he has to deal something with this. He has one son left who's considered a bit of a runt of the litter. He has to provide for him.
A bit of an Eric Trump.
A bit of Eric, maybe. And his wife has got advanced dementia by that stage, so she needs to be taken care of. But neither of these people he regarded as being proper to or appropriate to be executors of his estate. So he pulls up the pastor of this. He pulls up an individual within the church that he attends and makes him the executor of the estate. Then Stan dies in his own bed with a smile on his face in January 2010. And that $25 million, I believe, and having spoken to police about this, some was set aside for the son, but the son would not have known how much money was there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And clearly his wife did not know how much money was there, and she needed to be to be provided care. So I
Yeah.
believe some money was set aside for them, but the rest of it disappeared.
Yeah.
And we're not quite sure. Well, I do have a couple of theories, but
Yes. Let's not commit defamation today.
yeah, let's not do that. But yes, but Stan died with an estate of $25 million, having spent just 3 months in jail and having been
Yep.
responsible for 15 murders and
Yep.
25 shooting incidents. So he is clearly our number 2. And we've
And
run
at the
out
end
of
of the day,
time.
it went to God.
So we'll tell you our number 1 baddie, the worst piece of work imaginable, next week.
Bastard.
The suspense must be killing you, which ironically this man did rather a lot of as well. He did a lot of killing, but we need to devote an entire segment to him and give you the inside running on the man who, to my mind at least, is the most violent, cold-blooded murderer in this country's history.
Good Lord.
Stop your groaning, listeners. We'll get to it next week.